What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. And college football is officially back as we have gone through our first weekend of games. Now, at the time of recording this, Western Kentucky is still playing, as is Stanford, but we are going to be going over the 8 players that I think boosted their draft stock or hurt their draft stock through week 0 of college football. So if you guys do enjoy college football NFL draft content, I highly recommend hitting that like and subscribe button. We're going to be talking about these players all year long, so this is a great opportunity to get familiar with new prospects, get to know some of these guys as we get closer towards the NFL draft. But I'm super excited about this. There were some really fun games on this afternoon, so let's go ahead. Let's kick this off, starting off with a guy that I don't think a lot of people are going to be talking about as a true riser of the week, but I think he had a really strong performance, and that's going to be Dominique Orange out of Iowa State. Orange is a guy that I've had my eye on since last year. I thought there was a chance he would come out in the 2025 NFL draft. He ultimately decided to go back to school, and it definitely looks like he made the right decision. If you look at the stat sheet with Orange and kind of the numbers that he put up, you're going to be left pretty underwhelmed, I think, because he really didn't put up the craziest box score numbers. If you look at it, Orange ended up finishing the game with 2 tackles in this game, and that was it. But if you were watching this game, you just saw he was everywhere in this game for Iowa State. The explosiveness off the line of scrimmage for a 325-pound interior presence is really impressive. This is a player that can get off the line of scrimmage. His lateral quickness is absolutely incredible. So I think Dominique Orange has a real chance to continue to climb up these ranks because he obviously has the size, the athleticism, the pass rushing numbers, at least last year, were really positive for him. This is a guy that was a top 100 prospect for me, and after what we saw today, I think there's a chance he can keep climbing because, like I said, he's got the size, the athleticism, he's got versatility, and he was just consistently filling run lanes, being in the right place at the right time. So I think Big Citrus is a guy that absolutely should be on everyone's draft radar. And he was a big winner for me this week out in Dublin. But on the same team here, Iowa State, they did have a loser this week, and it's going to be Rocco Becht. We're going to talk about both of the quarterbacks for this Iowa State team, or for this matchup, I should say. But Rocco Becht, I thought he hurt his draft stock today. And again, if you look at the raw numbers, I think you're going to see the opposite. He ended up finishing the game 14-28, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a solid overall day, but I think when you look at it with Rocco Becht, it's the pocket presence. I thought it was really, really poor in this game. The offensive line did a pretty good job, at least in the second half, of protecting Rocco Becht. But when you were watching this in the first half, their offensive line was not giving him any benefit of the doubt, and he just was throwing off his back foot. The mechanics looked off. I thought that he really hurt his stock, and this is a player that I had in my top 15 quarterbacks coming into the year because I love the ability to play off talent. I think that he was really good at feeling the rush. He's really slippery, and there were times in the game where, yeah, we did see that with Becht, but there were also times where I thought he stood in the pocket for too long. He just was falling into where the pressure was coming from, and so I also thought the accuracy was a little bit worse than you wanted to see. He ended up finishing with 50% accuracy. I know the defense of Kansas State was everywhere. We'll get to that. But Rocco Becht, to me, was a player that I expected a little bit more of, and I was just left wanting a little bit more from him. So he is a player that ended up being a stock down for me. It's not like he's fallen out completely and he's an undrafted player. I'm not saying that. I think, though, he is probably a guy that is probably going to be a late day 3, more of a career backup guy if he continues to play like he did today. But let's get back to the positives here, and let's talk about who I think had the best weekend in all of college football, and that is going to be Kansas State edge rusher Toby Osunsomni. This player was phenomenal, and if you guys were watching the game, he was the best player on the field for either team in week 0. This is a guy that wasn't really on my radar, if I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. A guy that played well last year for Kansas State, had 30 pressures, 4 sacks on the year, ends up coming out today and puts up a really dominant edge performance. Ends up finishing the game with 7 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. This guy was everywhere. He was making plays in the run game, but I thought off of stunts and his ability to get after the quarterback, it was really, really impressive. And honestly, what it reminded me of was Donovan Ezeraku in week 1 last year. Ezeraku was a player that was maybe on like some late day 3 mocks. He had a productive season in 2023. And Ezeraku in that first game against Florida State was absolutely phenomenal. You just could not stop. He was everywhere. The announcers kept saying his name. And that's kind of how I felt about Osun Samni. This is a really good edge class, but this is a player that I think checks a lot of the boxes that you're looking for. He has pretty good size. The production is there for him. So I think that you really like that as well. And I think he's got the potential to continue to rise in this draft class. This Kansas State defense, the offense itself was pretty underwhelming, but defensively, this team was everywhere. They were fast. They were flying to the ball. I thought they did a good job of making life difficult for Rocco Becht. So I'm really intrigued to see what kind of year you're going to be getting from Osun Samni. Like I said, 6'3", 250 pounds, big edge rusher. I thought he was the best player that I watched today. So big time stock up, and a guy that I'm definitely going to be looking into the tape a little bit deeper this week. But continuing with Kansas State defenders that impressed me, it's Austin Romaine. I think Austin Romaine continues to be one of the most underrated players in all of college football. He wasn't really on a lot of consensus top linebacker lists coming into the year. This wasn't a guy that I feel like is being talked about nationally the way that I think he should be. Austin Romaine is a really good linebacker and a player that we should be talking about as a day 2 pick, in my opinion. He was everywhere yet again for this Wildcats defense. He had 5 tackles. He had a sack in this game. I thought he showed really good coverage. He had a play early in the first quarter where they were running across the middle of the field and he was able to knock the ball out, forcing an incompletion. It didn't get logged as a pass breakup for him, but he very much influenced where that ball was going and limited it from being caught. Romaine was one of my guys in my offseason scouting because he just does so much. He's 6'2", 240, has really good athleticism. He can trigger downhill. Obviously, you can dial him up as a blitzer. He had a sack today, but he's a really good downhill presence, snuffs out screens well. He's got really fluid hips and change of direction, and I think he can move well in coverage. He still is going to need to improve his tackling technique, but it's a guy that when you're watching this Kansas State offense, you just can't help but notice almost every single play, it seems. He is one of the best linebackers in the country. I thought he was fantastic today, not only as a pass rusher and as a blitzer and run defender, but I thought he made some really nice timely plays in coverage early in the game that really impressed me. So Austin Romaine continues to be a guy that I'm going to hype up throughout this season. I got the arrows continuing to point up on him. But Avery Johnson, let's talk about Avery Johnson because I think this is going to be one of my hot takes of the video. I don't think Avery Johnson played very good. And if you're a box score watcher, I get why you would think Avery Johnson had a really good game. This is a player that was heavily recruited coming out of high school, and on paper, his numbers weren't bad. He went 21 of 30, 273 yards, 2 touchdowns. But if you were watching him on a down-to-down basis, even the throws that ended up going for touchdowns, they weren't exactly good throws from Avery Johnson. The one to Jace Brown is the one I'm thinking of in particular. He underthrows Jace Brown by about 3 to 4 yards. He's got to slow down his route pretty drastically to come back and get the ball. And to me, that was the story of the day with Avery Johnson. Underthrows continuously were showing up in this game. A guy that just felt like he couldn't get the ball where he wanted to. The throws were constantly behind defenders. I really think he's going to need to improve, and I think he would do well by doing another year in school, because I think the areas where you wanted to see him improve were his size, which he did get bigger this offseason, and I think that was noticeable. His eyes, which I still felt like he was staring down reads, and his accuracy, and I didn't see that from him. He still is a good rushing threat, and that's one of my biggest issues with Kansas State in this game is they weren't utilizing Avery Johnson as a rushing threat the way that I think he should have been used. So overall, I think it was a pretty underwhelming performance from Avery Johnson, given the expectations. And when you look, like I said, when you look at the numbers, Avery Johnson's a guy that had a really good day, but I just think the game itself showed something completely different, and I think I'm going to continue to be lower on Avery Johnson as a player. Getting to a different game here, we go through the Iowa State game. Let's talk about the UNLV game, or no, let's talk about the Kansas game. Jalen Daniels might be back, ladies and gentlemen. Jalen Daniels was a player that I ended up rating as an undrafted free agent when I did my my NFL summer scouting, if you will. Because Daniels is a player that has dealt with injuries seemingly every year. The accuracy is concerning. The mechanics are concerning. I thought we saw a completely different quarterback today. Fresno State's defense just didn't know what to do, and I thought Daniels played absolutely phenomenal. His accuracy was on point. I want to say, let me pull up the numbers here for you, but I want to say he went 16 of 18 in this game. He went 18 of 20, 176 yards, 3 touchdowns, and obviously he is going to be an impact as a rushing threat. He had 8 carries for 47 yards. The accuracy, he was 90% accuracy-wise, which is a really, really good number, obviously. If Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, I don't think anyone's going to deny the talent that he has. He is an incredible athlete. He's a really good dual threat quarterback. No, he doesn't have the greatest size, and I still think that the deep ball is very spotty. I think that is the area that he has to improve on. But I thought he looked really comfortable in this offense. He was making good decisions. The ball was coming out, and I liked that they were making things very favorable for him. Short passes, getting the ball out of his hands quickly. That's the type of stuff we want to see from Jalen Daniels. Kansas looked really dominant against Fresno State. This is a completely new look roster from last year. But if they can continue to build momentum and Jalen Daniels can keep playing like he did today, yeah, this is a team that can contend in the Big 12 without a doubt. I will say the one area that I am still concerned about, he got leveled on a couple of these plays. He just takes some hits that really scare you. And for a quarterback that has dealt with injuries, I believe he had a back surgery at one point, that is something that is very concerning. So I have the arrows pointing up on Jalen Daniels. Let's see if he can continue to build off of this momentum. But a really, really good day from the Kansas quarterback. As for the UNLV Idaho State game, which is the only other game we're going to be covering today, Jaden Thomas is a guy that really caught my attention. A player that had a pretty productive season last year at UNLV as their number 1 rusher. And then today just kind of came out of nowhere. 5'9", 190, so a guy that isn't really the biggest back in the world, but he played really, really well for UNLV. Ended up going for 918 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. But in the opener against Idaho State, which ended up being a bit of a scare, more than I was anticipating it being, I thought he played phenomenal and was one of the best players on my screen this week. 10 carries, 147 yards, average of 14.7 yards per carry. That's a really good number. The speed is definitely there. When he gets the ball to the outside, he has the ability to take it to the house, and he did it today 3 different times. He had 3 touchdowns today for UNLV. Now, I'm not putting a ton of stock into this performance. I do have the stock up, and he's going to make my watch list. But you're playing Idaho State, not necessarily the creme de la creme of FCS programs. So let's see what he can do against more Mountain West opponents. But like I said, 900 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. Definitely a guy that has caught my attention and I think is worth at least logging this in the back of our minds that, yeah, this is a guy that can go for a big game, had over 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. So Jaden Thomas is a player that I'm really intrigued by. And then another UNLV guy, Anthony Calandria, the quarterback. Look, I don't know when us as a college football society are going to come to the conclusion that Alex Orji is not a good quarterback. And when I saw that Dan Mullen was starting him, I was just very confused for one thing. But secondly, I felt like they were doing Calandria a bit of a disservice. Calandria is a player that I really, really like. And I liked last summer. When I went through his tape at Virginia, I was watching him and I think this is a guy that could get into the draftable quarterback conversation. 6 foot, 183 pounds. He's not really the biggest guy in the world, but I think that his release is incredibly quick. He works the short to intermediate parts of the field really well. And I thought he showed the ability to go through progressions. We saw that today with UNLV. He went 15 of 21, 195 yards, had a touchdown. But I think he brings you really good athleticism to the table as well. A guy that was making plays for Virginia as a rushing threat. We saw him do that today, where he ended up running for 93 yards on 13 carries. So this is a guy that can pick up yards with his legs. I think he has good arm talent. Let's see him continue to build on it. I think Orji threw 3 passes and Calandria ended up playing the rest of the game. If I had to bet going forward, Calandria will be the starting quarterback, and I think that's the right decision for UNLV as a program. Let's see if he can continue building off of this, because I think he's a guy with real talent. Yes, doesn't have the biggest arm. He doesn't have the greatest frame in the world, and I think his footwork's going to need to improve, but I do like what we have seen from him up to this point, and I thought he had a pretty strong day for UNLV. But let's go over my top 25. Really no changes here. I'll adjust the screen here, but obviously nothing really changes. Only 2 teams in my top 25 played today, and that is going to be Iowa State and Kansas State. Now, I had Kansas State at number 21. I had Iowa State at number 20. I ended up dropping Kansas State down to 25. I was really disappointed by the offensive performance. I did a whole TikTok on this that you guys can go check out, but then the costly mistakes that Kansas State made in this game, I think are going to be, it's something that we're going to need to watch, because it's something that happened for them last year, and it continued for them today. Penalties, turnovers. I thought offensively they looked completely out of sorts. And now, when you lose Dylan Edwards on the first play of the game, yeah, you're going to obviously, your offense isn't able to run the ball. You're putting a lot more on Avery Johnson. So I do think that's worth noting, but the offensive line I didn't think played all that impressive. I just wasn't overly impressed by anything they did. So they're still a top 25 team to me. Iowa State, I didn't see anything either that I felt like justified moving them up in the power rankings. They played a fine game. I thought Rocco Beck, like I said, was very inconsistent. I am very worried about this receiving room, though. I didn't love what we saw from them. A lot of drops on tape from this team, which I thought were really telling. They were able to run the ball in the second half, so let's see if they can build off of that. But nothing really worth noting here for Iowa State. So I still have them staying at number 20. My top 25 otherwise remains unchanged. But guys, that's going to do it. Week 0, there's not too much to go over. We only really covered 3 games. If Colin Wright would have played, I think he could have been a real option in Stanford. Ben Roush is a tight end that really caught my attention. I love his blocking tape. Just didn't think that he brought enough as a receiver to really go stock up on him. But yeah, would love to hear from you guys. Which players really stuck out to you when you were watching college football this week? Stay tuned. We're going to be doing these every Saturday night. So if you enjoy these videos, hit that like button, subscribe if you are new. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.